the thing I'd like to do next is call upon the next speaker. That will be Professor Peter Cameron. Professor Cameron, are you with us?
All right. Well, there's the introduction, the advert. We're not supposed to advertise, but there we are. This is where I come from. CPMLP, I'm director of the Centre for Energy, Petroleum, Mineral Law and Policy, and here's a picture of our climate, which, as you can see, or of our iconic building, which is covered in snow. On the talk, COVID-19. This is what I want to be talking about, and I'm going to be fairly brief and to the point. These are very, very big topics, so I apologize for any superficiality here, but I'm afraid it's a short presentation. So you've got COVID-19 and you've got energy transition. I've switched the topics around a little bit so that I'm going to be talking more about COVID-19 first, and then talking secondly about the transition. Now, maybe if I could just go straight into COVID-19. In this slide, as you can see, I'm not an economist. Otherwise, I'd have lots of graphs and it'd be a really interesting and elegant and visually stimulating picture. But here you have what a lawyer tends to do, which is to provide a lot of text. So here you go with 5 points. First of all, the pandemic. Now, somebody already said, which is quite right, that it's had a modest impact so far in Africa. And I mean, that's still it's terrible that anybody has been affected by it in Africa, but relative to other parts of the world, the pandemic has had a modest impact. But that is not the key point. The point is that the pandemic is the origin of other events, and the other events are what are very, very important indeed. One is the global recession, so you get a collapse in demand, and following from that, the oil price collapse. All linked. The last point to make is that it has triggered a series of countermeasures by governments to protect citizens. Now, those are not coordinated. They happen at different points in time. They happen at different places across the planet. But they have important impacts, and they have impacts on business, on investors. So a quick takeaway for investment, which is what you asked me to talk about, and the legal side, is that governments in all countries have shown, maybe less in Africa, I'm not sure, but in many countries, governments have demonstrated that they can and they will, if necessary, interfere in the operation of investments to deal with a major health problem. Now, I suppose people could imagine that would happen, but now we've had concrete evidence of it. That just means that investors, if they're doing their job properly, are going to be looking more closely at legal protections in the future, in contract, in law, and in investment treaties before they go ahead and invest. They have that. Specifically, what we've seen are the sort of areas where you would be looking for more legal protection would be in health and safety, areas to do with tax breaks, payment delays and subsidies. For example, you might not be able to fulfill your obligations. If that does happen, what might a government do? Have you covered yourself in your contract design? There may be a suspension of exploration work programs. Is that something that is anticipated? There may have to be an emergency renegotiation of contracts. So all these things people will have to think about. Maybe they've thought about before, but now they have to think about much more vividly and with great enthusiasm if they want to make sure that they're properly covered. Currently, as far as I hear, when it comes to non-performance of contracts, and remember, you have hundreds of thousands of contracts out there, if not more, that are being affected by all of this. Is that anecdotal evidence that I hear is that delays are being viewed sympathetically, not cancellations, but postponements of performance because of the circumstances. But it does mean that if you're looking at a force majeure clause, you're going to look much more closely than you've ever done in the past, and you're going to look at it in different ways. You're going to look at it in terms of the standard of relief. You're going to be realizing that in future, force majeure events that are foreseeable include a significant disease or a pandemic. We've had it once, completely unexpected, but looking to the future, it should be something that you can anticipate when you open your house. That also is going to lead to a review of local laws that impact on investment and local regulations. So that's the first point about the COVID pandemic. The energy transition, this is different. Here are just a few facts. It's already happening in Europe, somewhat lesser pace in North America, and it's more patchy, but it's happening. And it may indeed accelerate during the virus period and its impacts. So what we're seeing is not that somehow renewable energy has become unfashionable, or quite the opposite. Second fact, this is a long-term process, and we are just in phase one. This is not something that's likely to go away, not a short-term process. Third point, a growing number of investors, I mean, this is a fact, a growing number of investors, as Dr. Naluli pointed out, have been warning about investment in the fossil fuel sector. Now, there really have been a growing number of those people. From a legal point of view, that's rather important, because it means if you're a company, you have to tell your shareholders that there are risks looking forward. You're under an obligation to do that. And if you don't do that, you could be sued at a later date. Impacts of all of this. Well, impact for Africa, I would have said very, very straightforward. Uncertainty about the security of long-term demand. Who are you selling these resources to? If your customers either become fewer or, even worse, they disappear, you don't have a business. And another point is that the cost of all this renewable energy technology is falling and falling and falling. That's very good. It means if you want to take it on board, you can. And much less expensive to do so. And then also behind it, maybe I should have said this earlier, but just to remind you of something you probably know, is that this is a very long-term investment in energy, is a long-term matter. You have these contracts, production sharing contracts, or a gas sale and purchase contract. And indeed, in renewable energy too, you have contracts that can last for decades. So you're not talking about 5 years or 10 years, it's a lot longer. It could be 25, it could be renewable at the end of 25, could be 30, and in mining as well. So this is a business in which investors typically think very long term. It's getting harder and harder with the energy transition to do that. And for new investors, I would say there's a need to do due diligence. If you haven't done it, and then you go to any kind of arbitration, you're likely to be in some serious trouble. I've only got a few slides. This is the last bigger one with the text. For Africa, I think at the moment there are few legal implications in the short term about it's likely that you will get investors looking for guarantees about long-term stability. You've seen that already before. You may just get a bit more of an emphasis on it in the future. Governments might, however, want to have a look their contract provisions about the exit of investors. It's all very well looking at what you want, but looking further down the line, if investors do find that the environment changes negatively, they might want to exit. What kind of provisions have you got in your contracts about that? Is it easy for them to go? In which case, you don't have your company. Decommissioning, another important area. Well, Nigeria has got quite a lot of thinking at the moment about decommissioning. Quite rightly, very, very important area. We would hope that it doesn't happen too soon, because it usually is all about cost. But a question would be, in this transition context, have you thought forward and have you made sure that your existing legal framework is sound? Is it robust? Because if you have doubts, it's easy. You go and look at what other countries are doing and learn some lessons, incorporate them, borrow. Who cares? It should be straightforward to make sure you've got strong arrangements in your law. And then longer term risks, well, we hope they might not happen. But, this is what lawyers do. They look to the future and they anticipate when things might go wrong. What about contract default? What about those investors that might just say, look, I want out of here. I said I was going to invest in Uganda, I know, but things have changed, so I'd quite like to leave. Defenses in disputes at a later date. Have you prepared for the unexpected, or for what some would say are now foreseeable risks? Wrapping up on timing, for Africa, the COVID-19 impacts may offer an opportunity to review policy on long-term diversification. I think, in a way, in that sense, maybe Africa does have a really exciting opportunity, sub-Saharan Africa in particular. In terms of action, I would say it doesn't do any harm at all to review petroleum law frameworks nice and quietly, model contracts, regulations, with the question, are they robust enough for us to manage risks that are now emerging and which we never thought would come about? And if so, how should good practice, which is evolving, how should that be maybe rethought? And as far as standards are concerned, I would say keep an eye on what's happening internationally, because we're likely to see some development in standards, industry standards to do with the petroleum industry, through changing industry practices. Never underestimate the extent to which the petroleum industry itself can innovate. It does it all the time. Regional and international organizations, regional in Africa, a lot of sharing of knowledge, that could be very, very beneficial in terms of working out about guidance, which way to go, what standards should we be using in the future. And you could see all that in purely African terms. So, Zach, I think that's where I'd like to end at this point. And I think that's been about 8 or 9 minutes, or maybe 10. But I'd like to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Cameron. I think I can speak for everyone when I say that we appreciate your ability to pack so much value into such a small amount of time and such few slides.